$4 shy of $350, to small children shivering beneath a single worn blanket, nearly 100 bikers thundering up a snow-buried road in the worst blizzard Pennsylvania had seen into decades. Any woman with a shred of self-preservation would have bolted the door and pulled her kids close. Naomi Reyes swung that door wide open. For seconds, one choice, made in the dark, in the cold, in the middle of a storm that had already taken everything the weather could reach. That decision would strip away what little she had left, and then hand her something she hadn't known the world could give. If this story is already pulling at something in you, hit that subscribe button right now. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see every corner of the world this travels to before it's done. The electric bill had been lying on the kitchen counter for 11 days. Naomi hadn't picked it up, not out of carelessness, not because she'd forgotten it was there. Her hand would drift toward it, and then stop, hovering just above the paper, like her body had already run the numbers and decided that touching it meant making something real that she wasn't ready to face. She had enough real things already, more than she could carry. She was 35 years old, 6 days a week. She tied on an apron at a diner called Patty's Place out on Route 9, where the vinyl booths had cracked at the seams and the coffee was thin and tips. On a generous day, might total $40. She had 2 children. Eli was 8, already measured, to watchful for his age. Rosie was 6, small and fierce, with asthma that tightened every time the seasons shifted. She rented a farmhouse on the edge of Blackwater, Pennsylvania, $900 a month for a place that wasn't worth half that. She had a 2009 Civic with a serpentine belt that was held together by prayer and stubbornness. She'd been nursing it along for 4 months, and she had $342. That was the entire picture. That was everything. The storm had rolled in on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, the National Weather Service was calling it historic. By Wednesday night, the power was out. By Thursday, the night this story truly begins, the temperature inside Naomi's farmhouse had dropped to 41 degrees. Eli had gathered every blanket in the house and dragged them to the living room floor, building his little sister a nest near the fireplace where Naomi was burning what remained of a broken wooden chair she'd hauled him from the barn. She stood in the kitchen, wearing 2 sweaters beneath a coat, staring into the open freezer. Half a bag of frozen peas, 1 chicken breast, a container of rice from 2 days ago, 4 slices of bread on the counter, going stiff at the edges. She had already eaten less than her children, twice. They didn't know. She'd made absolutely certain they didn't know. When Rosie had asked why Mama wasn't touching her soup, Naomi said she'd eaten earlier at work. She hadn't. The diner had shut down early ahead of the storm, and Patty, her boss, a woman whose generosity had always come with edges, had sent everyone home without pay for the lost hours. Naomi closed the freezer door. She reached for her phone. 14% battery. No Wi-Fi since the power died. 1 bar of signal that flickered in and out. She opened the calculator and ran the math she had already run 100 times in her head. The math she kept hoping would land differently if she just tried once more. Rent in 8 days, $900. Rosie's inhaler prescription, $47, even with the discount card, because the diner's insurance carried a $500 deductible she hadn't touched yet this year. Eli's left boot had a hole in the sole she'd been sealing with duct tape. The tape wasn't holding anymore. $342. She pressed the home button. The screen went dark. Mom. Eli was standing in the kitchen doorway, flashlight in hand, face serious in the way only a child who has learned to take the world seriously can manage. Rosie's coughing again. Naomi moved without hesitating. Rosie was sitting up in her blanket nest, breathing in the shallow, rapid way that always sent a bolt through Naomi's chest. Not a full attack, not yet, but a warning, a preview of what could come. Hey, sweetheart. Naomi dropped to her knees beside her daughter, pressing her palm gently to Rosie's forehead. No fever. You doing okay? My chest feels tight, Rosie said quietly. I know it does. Naomi drew slow circles on her back. Breathe with me. Slow and steady. Without a word, without being asked, Eli sat down cross-legged beside his sister and took her hand. 8 years old. Already understanding that some moments don't need words. They only need presence. Naomi watched her son hold her daughter's hand in the firelight and felt something move through her that she couldn't name. Cleanly, love, grief, pride, all of it pressed together so tightly she couldn't find where one ended and the next began. They're okay, she told herself. Right now they're okay. Right now is what matters. She got Rosie's inhaler from her coat pocket, the one with 2 puffs left, maybe 3, and helped her use it. Then she settled against the base of the couch, her children leaning into her, and listened to the storm work its way around the corners of the house. She was counting the remaining pieces of the chair, calculating how much longer the fire would hold, when she heard something. She thought at first it was the wind. The wind had been doing strange things all night, groaning and rattling, producing sounds that didn't quite have a natural explanation. So when the new sound began, low and rhythmic and building from somewhere distant, she dismissed it. Then it got louder. Eli raised his head. Mom, what is that? Naomi got to her feet. The sound was coming from the road, from multiple directions at once. A deep mechanical roar that was compounding and growing and making the single-pane windows shiver in their frames. Engines. Not 1 or 2. Dozens. Stay here, she said. She kept her voice even. She always kept her voice even around her kids. Steady and solid. Like the floor beneath them was. Reliable even when she knew it wasn't. She took the flashlight from Eli and went to the front window. Her breath stopped. Headlights. River of headlights cutting through the blizzard. Coming up a gravel road, 2 lanes wide, stretching back so far into the dark that she couldn't find where they ended. Below the headlights came the unmistakable, bone-deep thunder of motorcycle engines. She counted to 60 and gave up. Mom. Eli had appeared behind her, because he was 8 and curious, and apparently this was louder than obedience. Go back to Rosie, she said. But what is? She turned and looked at him. Just looked. He went. Naomi stood at the window for 3 more seconds. Then she made a decision that most people would call reckless, that a handful might call brave, and that she would later describe simply as having no other option. She put her hand on the doorknob. She opened the door. The cold hit her like a physical wall. Snow spun into the entryway. The roar of engines swallowed everything, and at the head of the procession, pulling up onto the gravel nearest her porch, was the largest motorcycle she had ever seen, carrying the largest man she had ever seen. He killed the engine. The relative quiet that followed felt enormous. He swung off the bike with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for decades, and he walked toward her porch with both hands open and visible at his sides. He was enormous. 6'3", maybe 6'4", grey hair pulled back, a beard worn in by weather, a face creased and textured like leather left in the sun. He wore a heavy black jacket covered in patches she couldn't read in the dark, and he stopped at the bottom of her steps and looked up at her. Behind him, one by one, engines shut off in a slow ripple down the length of the road. The silence they left was almost startling. Evening, ma'am, the man said. His voice was deep and unhurried, the voice of someone who had stopped rushing a long time ago. I'm going to be straight with you, because I think you deserve straight right now. My name is Boone Walker. I'm the road captain for about 98 riders. We were heading back from a veterans benefit ride out of Pittsburgh when this storm moved faster than anyone predicted. We've been on the road for 4 hours. 3 of my riders are showing signs of hypothermia. Every motel and shelter between here and Harrington is either closed or full. The roads ahead are blocked. State police confirmed it 20 minutes ago. There's no moving forward tonight. A pause. I saw your light from the road. Naomi stared at him. He waited. He didn't push. He didn't step forward. He simply gave her the time to hold what he'd just placed on her doorstep. How many? She finally said. 98. She almost laughed. Not from any kind of humor, but from the sheer geometric impossibility of the number. In this house, I understand what I'm asking, he said. His voice didn't apologize, but it wasn't hard either. It was simply honest. I've got men who've done 2-3 tour overseas, men who've been sober a decade, men with grandchildren. He glanced back at the dark row of riders standing still in the snow. We're not what people assume when they see the patches. But I can't prove that to you standing on a porch. You're going to have to make a call. Naomi looked past him, at the army of leather-clad strangers, motionless in her driveway. She thought about Rosie's shallow breathing. She thought about $342. She thought about what Eli would do if something happened to her. And then she thought, and she could never fully explain this part, not even years later, about the way Boone Walker had said, I think you deserve straight right. Now, as if her dignity was something he had noticed and decided to respect before he even knew whether she'd help him. She stepped back from the door. Get your hypothermia cases inside first, she said. Then we'll figure out the rest. Boone looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his face that wasn't exactly relief, more like recognition. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly. Thank you. The next 40 minutes were the strangest of Naomi's life. She had lived 35 years. She had seen things she hadn't expected, but she had never, in any version of any future she had imagined, stood in her kitchen boiling water, while the sound of nearly 100 motorcycle boots filled her living room, her hallway, her porch, the barn she no longer used. Most of them were enormous, these men, big shoulders and ink running up their necks, and road names like Crash and Dutch and T-Bone that sounded like they belonged in something fictional. But they moved through her house with a careful, deliberate awareness that they were guests. Nobody touched what wasn't offered. Nobody raised their voice. They sat on the floor when chairs ran out, pressed themselves against walls to open space for each other. The 3 riders in the worst shape were brought to the kitchen and wrapped in everything Naomi owned that could pass as a blanket, including the Afghan her grandmother had made, which she handed over without letting herself think about it too hard. A man who introduced himself as Doc, not a real doctor, just what they call me. I was a field medic in Iraq, moved quietly through the house conducting a systematic check on every rider. Eli materialized in the kitchen doorway. Eli, Naomi said. There's a man in the living room, the size of our refrigerator, Eli said. He says his name is Hammer. Okay, Mom. His name is Hammer. Go ask Hammer if he wants some water. Eli stared at her with the look of a child who has concluded his mother has taken leave of her senses. Then, because he was his mother's son, he squared his 8-year-old shoulders and went. Naomi turned back to the stove. She had 1 chicken breast, frozen peas, rice, and a great deal of water. She started calculating what she could stretch it into. A hand appeared beside her, a large hand covered in tattoos, and set a duffel bag on the counter. The man it belonged to was built like something structural, bald-headed with a jaw like poured concrete, and he was looking at the bag rather than at her, as if this arrangement made things easier. Don't touch your food, he said. I wasn't going to take your food, Naomi said. I know. I'm offering it. He unzipped the bag and stepped back. She looked inside. Granola bars, jerky, instant oatmeal, a large bag of trail mix, 2 cans of soup, a box of crackers, 3 slightly bruised apples. Naomi stared at the apples. She couldn't have explained afterward why the apples were the thing that got to her. They just were. Something about their ordinary bruised wholeness. Thank you, she said. She said it in a voice that held more than the words could cover. Name's Big Ray, he said, and walked out of the kitchen. By 9 o'clock, Naomi's farmhouse contained 98 bikers, 2 children, and 1 woman who kept moving, because stopping meant thinking, thinking meant feeling, and feeling meant the risk of coming completely apart in front of strangers. She passed out water, heated soup, directed people toward the 1 bathroom with apologies for the pressure, and received in return a universal shrug. These were apparently people who had slept in considerably worse conditions and found the current arrangement perfectly acceptable. Rosie had woken from her doze and was sitting on the living room floor, wrapped in her blanket, studying the enormous tattooed men arranged around her with the intense focus of a scientist observing a new species. A biker with a silver hoop earring and a beard that reached his chest caught her looking. "What?" he said. "You have a spider on your arm," Rosie said. He looked down at his forearm. "Yeah, that's Charlotte, like Charlotte's Web." He blinked. It was clearly the last answer he'd expected. "Yeah, actually, exactly like that. My mom reads us that book," Rosie said. "The spider dies at the end. I cried for a whole day." The man, whose road name was Spider-Man, which he did not share with the 6-year-old, looked at Rosie for a quiet moment. Then he sat down cross-legged on the floor across from her, so he wasn't looming, and said, "Me too, kid, me too." Naomi watched from the doorway and felt something shift in the room. Not dramatically, quietly, the way the feeling of a space changes before you can identify exactly why. A slow settling, a loosening of something that had been pulled tight. These men, who were apparently afraid of very little, were being gentle with her daughter. It was Boone who found the bills. He hadn't been looking for them. He'd asked Naomi where to find a broom. A pipe had dripped on the hallway floor, and he wanted to deal with it. And she'd pointed him toward the closet near the kitchen, and the stack of envelopes on the counter was impossible not to see. It had been there long enough to develop its own gravity, pulling her eyes every time she passed. He didn't say anything then, but later, when the house had grown quiet, riders sleeping in every available space, the storm still hammering outside, he found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes closed. Not sleeping, just existing in the only pocket of quiet she'd had all day. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. She opened her eyes. "You didn't sleep," he said. "Not a question." "I don't sleep much," she said. He nodded. Then, "How long has the heat been out?" She looked at him. "I noticed the fireplace," he said. "And the coats inside. And the bills. You shouldn't have been looking. I wasn't prying. I just see things." Old habit from a time when seeing things was the difference between making it home and not. Naomi looked at her hands on the table. 3 days, she said. "Heat has been out 3 days, and you've been managing on the fireplace. We were fine. I didn't say you weren't, and somehow that was worse than an argument. The absence of it, the way he just let her defensiveness sit there without pushing back." She looked up. "What do you want me to say, Mr. Walker?" "Nothing," he said. "I'm not looking for a confession. I'm just..." He paused. "I grew up in a house where the heat was out longer than 3 days. My mother wore 2 coats indoors and told us she wasn't cold." He stopped. "I was 9 before I understood she was lying to protect us." Naomi said nothing. "How long have you been skipping meals?" The question landed like something physical. She hadn't told anyone. Not her sister in Ohio. Not Patty. Not the social worker who'd done a routine check-in 3 months ago when Rosie's school flagged a concern about her weight. She had answered every question correctly, smiled at the right moments, sent the woman away satisfied. She had not told a single person. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Boone looked at her for a long moment. His face was unreadable, the expression of someone who had learned to keep things contained because the outside world wasn't always a safe place for them. Then he stood without pressing further. He walked to the counter, picked up 3 granola bars, and set them on the table in front of her. "Good night, Miss Reyes," he said, and he walked out. Naomi stared at the granola bars. She ate all 3 at 2:30 in the morning. A sound she couldn't place pulled her awake. She'd fallen asleep at the table, head on her arms. She sat up fast, heart slamming, cataloguing threats immediately the way she always did. The reflex of someone who had been the only adult in this house for 4 years. The sound was coming from outside. She moved through the dark, stepping over sleeping riders in the hallway and the living room, and pushed open the front door. The storm had broken. The snow had stopped. The air was brutally cold and absolutely still. And on her roof, in the 3 a.m. darkness, with flashlights clenched between their teeth and tools she didn't own, 3 bikers were sealing the gaps in her shingles where snow had been working its way inside. She stood in the doorway and looked up at them. One of them noticed her and removed the flashlight from his mouth. "Sorry if we woke you." Boone said to wait till the storm broke. "Couldn't sleep anyway. You're fixing my roof?" Naomi said. Double quotes, "Yes, ma'am. In the middle of the night. Best time for it. No wind." She stood there another moment. "Can I bring you coffee?" "I have instant." A pause. "That'd be real nice." She went inside and made 3 cups in the dark and brought them out in the cold and handed them up to men she didn't know who were fixing something she hadn't asked them to fix. The only words exchanged were "thank you" and "you're welcome." And somehow that was entirely enough. She went back inside. She sat in the chair beside the dying fire, and for the first time in longer than she could honestly trace, Naomi Reyes closed her eyes and slept without dreaming about money. Morning came grey and still and quiet. The storm was completely gone. The world outside lay buried in white. Inside Naomi's farmhouse, 98 bikers were waking slowly, stiffly, the way large men wake after a night on hardwood floors. She had expected awkwardness, expected the strange morning inequality of people who've shared something intimate under pressure, and now had to meet each other in daylight. She'd have expected, if she was honest, for the clarity of morning to make these men frightening again in ways the crisis of the night had suspended. Instead, what happened was this. Big Ray found the leaking bathroom pipe and fixed it with tools from his saddlebag, whistling quietly to himself. A rider named Church, who had enormous hands and a gentle manner, spent 45 minutes sitting beside Rosie asking specific questions about her breathing. His daughter had asthma, he told Naomi quietly. Worse than Rosie's. He knew exactly what he was looking for. Eli had been recruited to the barn. When Naomi went to check on him, she found her son swinging an axe under the patient supervision of a biker named Dutch, who was built like a wardrobe and moved the tool like it weighed nothing. They had been splitting the dead wood from her fallen fence into fireplace logs. Enough to last 3 weeks. Other hand hire, Dutch was saying. There you go. Feel how that changes it. Eli swung. The log split cleanly. He turned to Dutch with a look of pure, incandescent triumph. Dutch raised his hand for a high five. Natural, kid. Naomi leaned in the barn doorway and watched her son laugh, full and unguarded and completely unself-conscious. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard him like that. He had learned to be careful, this boy. Careful with his mother's worries, careful with Rosie's health, careful with hope. But right now he was just a boy who had split a log perfectly, and the whole world had collapsed into that single, uncomplicated joy. She turned away before he could see her face. By noon, the state police had confirmed the main roads were open. Boone gathered his riders with a low whistle that moved through the farmhouse and barn with the efficiency of a signal they all knew. Within 15 minutes, they were outside, organized and ready. The transformation was striking. The same men who'd been sprawled across her floors were now crisp and purposeful. Boone found her and pulled an envelope from inside his jacket. For the inconvenience, he said. I don't want your money. It's not for you, he said. It's for Rosie's inhaler. Doc checked her this morning. She needs a refill. Naomi looked at the envelope. She wanted to refuse. Every instinct in her had been shaped by 4 years of single parenthood to decline help, because accepting it meant acknowledging need, and acknowledging need meant confronting how close to the edge she actually stood, and she could not afford to do that and keep functioning. But she thought about Rosie's tight chest in the firelight the night before. She took the envelope. Thank you, she said. Boone nodded. He started to turn away, then stopped. Naomi. It was the first time he'd used her name. This town you're in, Blackwater. People been good to you here. She considered giving him the comfortable answer. She was very practiced at comfortable answers. It's a small town, she said instead. He looked at her steadily. That's not a yes. No, she agreed. It's not. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger exactly. Something older and more settled. Okay, he said. He walked to his bike. 98 engines started up one by one until the air was full of thunder. And then they were gone. Naomi stood in her driveway in the snow and watched the last taillight disappear around the bend. The silence they left was the loudest thing she had ever heard. She stood there until her feet went numb. Then she went inside to figure out what was left of her life. She didn't know yet that what remained was about to be taken apart, piece by piece, by people who had been waiting years for the right excuse. And she didn't know yet that a grey-haired man on a motorcycle somewhere on a Pennsylvania highway had just made a phone call that would set something in motion. The town of Blackwater had no way to prepare for. The envelope contained $400. Naomi counted it 3 times in her kitchen, as though the number might shift if she looked long enough. It didn't. $400. More cash in her hands at one time than she'd held in over a year. Enough for Rosie's inhaler. Enough for groceries. Enough to keep the power on another month if she was careful. She was always careful. She put it in the coffee can above the refrigerator, her emergency fund, which until this moment had contained exactly $11 and some change. She stood with her hand on the can and allowed herself to feel, for just a few seconds, something that was almost like breathing room. Then her phone rang. Linda Marsh, 2 roads over. Linda was the kind of woman who treated other people's lives as her primary occupation, delivering information with the cheerful efficiency of someone who had long ago decided this was her calling. Naomi. Her voice was bright with barely contained news. I heard you had some visitors last night. Naomi set the coffee can back on the shelf. Roads were blocked. They needed somewhere to wait out the storm. Hell's Angels, though, are paused doing considerable work. You know what they are, right? What they do. They were veterans on a charity ride. Naomi said. They fixed my roof, honey. Linda's voice shifted into something softer and more dangerous. The register of someone who has decided your situation is their concern. I'm just saying people talk, and in a town this size, they've been talking since about 6 this morning. Naomi said goodbye and hung up. She stood very still. Then she picked up her keys and drove Rosie to the pharmacy before anything else could happen. She would come to understand later that the damage was already done before she ever reached the car. The pharmacy was 12 minutes from the farmhouse. She made it in 9. Rosie sat in the passenger seat, her backpack on her lap, humming something that may or may not have been a real song, drawing shapes on the fogged window with one finger. The pharmacist, Gerald, who had been filling Rosie's prescriptions for 2 years, wouldn't quite meet Naomi's eyes when he handed over the inhaler. She noticed. She said nothing. She thanked him and paid, and walked out. In the parking lot, she passed 2 women from the school district, faces she knew but couldn't name. They were looking at her. When she met their eyes, both of them looked away, simultaneously, the way people do when they've been talking about you and haven't finished. Mom, Rosie said, slipping her hand into Naomi's. Those ladies were rude. They're just busy. They were staring. Don't worry about it. Rosie was quiet for a moment. Is it because of the motorcycle men? Naomi stopped walking. She looked down at her daughter, 6 years old, asthma lunged, sharper than anyone gave her credit for, and felt something move through her chest. She couldn't name. No, she said. It's not about anything. Rosie looked up at her with the calm, unblinking certainty of a child who knows when she's being protected from something true. Okay, Mom, she said. She kept holding her hand all the way to the car. Naomi was back at work by Thursday afternoon. The diner had reopened, and she needed the hours. She always needed the hours. Patty's place was warm and smelled like coffee and bacon grease and the particular brand of small-town familiarity that Naomi had once found comforting and now found faintly suffocating. She tied on her apron, clocked in, and took her section. The first table she approached went quiet when she walked up. 4 women, regulars, Thursday soup special, the kind who came in every week and talked loudly enough that Naomi had learned more about their families over 2 years of serving them than she'd ever wanted to know. They looked up at her with the expression she'd already seen twice today. That particular combination of curiosity and judgment people wear when they've made up their minds about you. Morning, ladies. The usual. Naomi. The woman who spoke was Dana Crane, whose husband sat on the town council. Her voice was carefully neutral in the way that is not neutral at all. Is it true you had gang members at your house? Naomi kept her face completely still. 2 years of waitressing had given her a face that could absorb almost anything without showing it. I had stranded veterans shelter from a blizzard, she said. Hell's Angels aren't veterans. They're a criminal organization. Several of them are both, Naomi said evenly. The soup today is beef barley. Can I start you with that? Dana Crane looked at her. I don't think it was wise, she said finally, exposing your children to that element. Naomi wrote down the orders and walked away. She made it to the kitchen before her hands started shaking. She pressed both palms flat against the stainless steel counter and breathed through her nose until it stopped. It took longer than she would have liked. You okay? Said Marcus, the teenage cook, apparently the only person in the building unaware that anything was wrong. Fine, Naomi said. Table 4 wants the soup special, all 4. She got through the rest of her shift by making herself very small inside. Retreating to that interior place she'd learned to find when things pressed her hard. She smiled when she needed to smile. She refilled coffee when coffee needed refilling. She said you're welcome and have a great day, and let me know if you need anything in a loop that demanded nothing from her. At 4:30. Patty called her to the back office. Patty was 60, red-haired from a box, reading glasses permanently parked on her head, direct in a way Naomi had always respected even when it cut against her. She stood behind her desk with her arms crossed, her expression doing something complicated, something that looked like guilt trying to disguise itself as practicality. I've had 4 calls today, Patty said, from customers, about the situation. The situation, Naomi repeated. The bikers, all of it. I helped stranded people survive a blizzard. That's the situation. I know that's how you see it. That's how it was. Patty pressed her lips together. Naomi, I have a business to run, and I have customers telling me they're not comfortable. Not comfortable, Naomi said, and something in her voice had shifted. Something quiet had entered it that was the opposite of retreat. Coming in knowing that your staff is what, Patty? What exactly am I that makes your customers uncomfortable? Patty was silent. I need to let you go, she said. Effective end of today. The words fell into the room and sat there. Naomi looked at the woman who had employed her for 2 years, who had twice given her Thanksgiving leftovers, who had adjusted her schedule when Rosie was in the hospital, and waited for something to make sense. Nothing did. I'll have your check ready Friday, Patty said. Naomi stood up. She untied her apron. She folded it carefully, because she was not going to give this woman the satisfaction of watching her throw it, and she set it on the desk, and she walked out without another word. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 11 minutes. Then she drove home. The letter from her landlord was in the mailbox. Ray Gunderson had owned the farmhouse for 30 years and managed it with the benign neglect of someone who collected rent checks and preferred not to dwell on the properties generating them. He was not, as landlords went, the worst. He fixed things when she asked. He hadn't raised the rent in 2 years. She had allowed herself to believe, in the cautious way she permitted herself to believe things, that she was safe there. The letter was 2 paragraphs. The first cited a clause in her lease about maintaining the character and safety of the property and refraining from activities that could attract criminal elements or create liability for the owner. The second gave her 30 days. Naomi read it standing in the driveway. She read it again. Then she folded it precisely along its original crease and carried it inside and set it on the counter beside the other envelopes. The stack was growing taller. She stood in the kitchen for a long time without moving. Then she called her sister in Ohio. Dana picked up on the second ring with a cheerful "Hey, you." That became something else entirely in the half-second of silence that followed. What happened? Dana said. I got fired today. Oh, nay, and my landlord is evicting me. A pause. For what? For letting stranded veterans sleep on my floor during a blizzard. A longer pause. I'm coming down there. You're not coming down here. Naomi, Dana, I'm fine. I just needed to say it out loud to someone. Naomi's voice was perfectly steady. She was very good at steady. I just needed one person to know. You need more than that. You need a plan. I know what I need. I'll figure it out. She said goodbye and hung up. She looked at her phone. 2% battery. She plugged it in. She went to check on the kids. Eli was at the kitchen table doing homework. Rosie was on the living room floor with her crayons, filling a page with what appeared to be motorcycles, a great many of them, some with flames along the sides. Mom, Rosie said without looking up. Did you know Spider-Man's real name is Kevin? Naomi stopped. How do you know his real name? He told me. Rosie added a wheel. Before they left this morning he came and said goodbye. He said his daughter's name is Emma, and she's 7, and she likes horses. Naomi crouched down beside her daughter. He came to say goodbye specifically. Mum, Rosie added flames. He said I was brave for asking about his tattoo. She looked up. Was I brave? Yeah, baby. You were. Rosie smiled and returned to her drawing. Naomi stood. She looked at the crayon motorcycles, filling the page, and felt something gather at the back of her throat. Something more complicated and more urgent than nostalgia. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Ms. Reyes. A woman's voice. Clipped and professional. This is Janet Hollis, from the Blackwater County Department of Child and Family Services. We've received a report regarding the welfare of your children. I'd like to schedule a home visit at your earliest convenience. The room went very quiet around Naomi. A report, she said. Double quotes. Yes, ma'am. Regarding potential exposure to criminal activity and concerns about adequate housing and nutrition. Naomi kept her voice completely flat. It was the only way to manage what was rising in her chest. Who filed the report? I'm not able to share that information. When can you come? We prefer within 48 hours when a report has been filed. Fine, Naomi said. Come whenever you need to. She ended the call. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the stack of envelopes and thought, with a clarity that was almost peaceful. Someone is doing this deliberately. Not one thing. Not Linda Marsh gossiping. Not customers complaining to Patty. Not her landlord's sudden concern about liability. All of it together. Within 48 hours of the bikers leaving her driveway, someone had decided to bury her, and she didn't even know who yet. She found out the next morning. She'd been up since 5 cleaning. Not because the house was dirty, but because she needed her hands doing something specific and controllable, while her mind worked through everything else. She scrubbed the kitchen floor. She organized the cabinets. She made sure Rosie's room was immaculate, that clean towels were in the bathroom, that there was nothing a child services investigator could point to as evidence of anything. At 7:15, there was a knock. She opened the door expecting a neighbor, possibly Janet Hollis, arriving early. It was a man in a suit, mid-50s, silver hair, the particular softness that comes from having things other people want. He held a business card between 2 fingers like an offering. Ms. Reyes. Harold Pike. I'm on the Blackwater Town Council. I wonder if I might have a few minutes. She knew his name. Everyone in Blackwater knew Harold Pike's name. 12 years on the council. Largest real estate development company in the county. A reputation for getting what he wanted with the patient, methodical efficiency of someone who had never needed to hurry, because time always moved in his direction. She also knew the way you know things in a small town without ever being told directly, that Harold Pike had been trying to purchase the land beneath a farmhouse for 2 years. It backed up to a creek that bordered a parcel he was developing into something with the words luxury and retreat in its name. Her landlord had mentioned it once, offhandedly, the way people mention things they've already decided don't concern you. She looked at Harold Pike on her porch and understood, immediately and completely, that the events of the past 48 hours had his fingerprints on every one of them. Mr. Pike, she said, I know who you are. Then you know I'm someone worth talking to. He smiled. A practiced smile, worn smooth. May I come in? No. A flicker behind the smile. Just a flicker. This doesn't have to be difficult, Ms. Reyes. I understand you're facing some challenges right now. Housing instability, employment issues. I'm in a position to help. He tucked the business card back into his pocket with the ease of someone accustomed to this choreography. I'm prepared to offer a very fair relocation package, enough to get you and your children settled somewhere more suitable. A fresh start, new town, new school, the resources to actually make something work. Naomi stared at him. You did this, she said. All of it. The report to Child Services. My landlord. I help people understand their interests, he said pleasantly. Patty. A pause. Small business owners make their own decisions. You want my land, my landlord's land, and you used what happened the other night to manufacture a reason to force us both out. Harold Pike looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke again, the practiced pleasantness was still in place, but something beneath it had shifted. Something harder, and considerably more patient, and much less interested in performance. I want you to think carefully, he said, about what your position actually is right now. No income, facing eviction, Child Services opening an investigation, bank probably not far behind. Given your payment history, he let that sit. I'm offering you a way out that leaves you with something. If you wait, if you make this difficult, you'll leave with nothing, and your children will leave with nothing. Naomi held the door. She looked at Harold Pike, this man in his good suit with his good smile, who had in less than 2 days systematically dismantled every fracture of structure she had built around her children's survival. Get off my property, she said. Something moved across his face. Not anger, something colder. Think about what I said, he told her. She closed the door. She stood in the hallway with her back against it, eyes closed, heart slamming with a force that felt like something trying to get out. Then she heard Rosie in the kitchen asking Eli if he wanted cereal. She pushed off the door. She went to the kitchen. She made her children breakfast, sat with them while they ate, asked Eli about his homework, listened to Rosie explain the intricate mythology of her motorcycle drawings, which had apparently developed into a full saga with named characters and an evolving plot. She laughed at the right moments. She kept her voice steady. And underneath all of it, moving through her like cold water through cracked stone, was the knowledge that Harold Pike was right about one thing. She was almost out of road. The Child Services visit came the following afternoon. Janet Hollis was a small, precise woman in her 40s who carried a clipboard and wore an expression of careful neutrality that disclosed nothing. She walked through the farmhouse methodically, asking questions in a calm, unhurried voice, while Naomi followed and answered everything directly. The house was clean. The refrigerator was stocked. She'd spent $60 of Boone's money on groceries the night before, hating the calculation and doing it anyway. Rosie's medication was in order. Eli's schoolwork was on the table. Every surface that could be explained was explainable. Janet Hollis made notes. At the end of the walkthrough, she sat at Naomi's kitchen table and folded her hands on the clipboard. Ms. Reyes, she said, I want to be direct with you. The report that was filed was specific, detailed, the kind of specific that suggests someone with particular knowledge of your circumstances. Naomi waited. The concerns about your children's welfare don't appear to be substantiated by what I'm seeing today. A pause. However, the report also included documentation, financial records, employment status. She looked at Naomi carefully. How that information was obtained is something I find concerning. Not about you. What are you saying? I'm saying that in 11 years of doing this work, I have occasionally seen this process used as a tool. She spoke carefully, like someone who had learned to be precise about which things she could say out loud. I can't act on that, but I can tell you the report itself is weak, and I will be documenting what I observed here today accurately. Naomi looked at this woman, this quiet, careful woman with her clipboard, and her neutrality that wasn't as complete as it appeared. Thank you, Naomi said. Don't thank me yet, Janet said. If someone is determined to make your life difficult, one visit won't stop them. She gathered her things and stood. Do you have anyone in your corner, Ms. Reyes? Naomi thought about Dana in Ohio, 6 hours away. She thought about Patty, who had folded in under 48 hours. She thought about Boone Walker driving away on a Pennsylvania highway. "I'm working on it," she said. Janet Hollis nodded once, as though that was a reasonable answer. She left. Naomi sat at the kitchen table after the door closed, put her face in her hands, and gave herself exactly 60 seconds to feel the full weight of how exhausted she was. She did not cry. Crying required someone else present to witness it, and she was almost always alone. Then she lifted her head. She picked up her phone. She didn't have Boone's number. He hadn't offered it, and she hadn't asked, because at the time they were strangers who had shared a blizzard and nothing more. But she remembered the name, Road Captain. She typed it into the search bar. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. She wasn't sure she had a plan. What she had was a suspicion, growing stronger by the hour, that whatever was coming next was beyond what she could manage alone, and that somewhere over a Pennsylvania highway was the only person who had looked at the full truth of her situation and not flinched. She found a chapter contact form for a veterans benefit ride coordination. She stared at it for a long time. She started typing. 3 sentences in, her phone buzzed. Incoming call. Unknown number. Different from child services. She answered. Naomi Reyes. A man's voice. Older. Graveled. Yes. My name is Roy Harden, loan officer at First County Bank. I'm calling regarding the property I rent, Naomi said. I don't have a mortgage. A pause. Yes, ma'am. I'm aware you rent. I'm actually calling about a conversation I had today with the property owner, Mr. Ray Gunderson. Another pause. Longer. He's agreed to sell to a development company. Closing is scheduled for 3 weeks from Friday. 3 weeks. That's not enough time. Naomi said. I understand this is difficult news. Where am I supposed to go? Something underneath her voice had cracked. Just a hairline fracture. Invisible to everyone but her. I have 2 children. 3 weeks is not enough time. I'm sorry, Ms. Reyes, the man said. And he sounded as though he meant it, which somehow made it worse. I thought you deserved to hear it directly, she said. Thank you, and hung up. She sat very still. 3 weeks. No job. Savings of $400, already earmarked for a prescription and groceries. Eviction in 30 days. Sale closing in 3 weeks. Child services watching. Harold Pike somewhere in the background, patient as geology, waiting for her to run out of road. She looked at the contact form, still open on her phone. She finished the 3 sentences. She wrote 3 more. She typed her number at the bottom. She pressed send. Then she put the phone face down on the table, got up, and went to start dinner, because whatever was closing in from every direction, her children were going to eat tonight. She was still at the stove when her phone lit up on the table. A text from an unknown number. 4 words. We're already on the way. She read it 4 times. We're already on the way. No name, no explanation. Just those 4 words, sitting on her screen in the blue light of the kitchen, while something on the stove was starting to bubble over and her children were arguing in the next room about whose turn it was to pick the movie. She turned off the burner. She typed back. Who is this? The reply came in under 30 seconds. Boone. Gave me a backup phone. We've been watching the situation since we left. Don't ask how. Just know we weren't going to leave you hanging. She stared at that message for a long time. We've been watching the situation. She didn't know what that meant exactly. She wasn't certain she wanted to know. What she knew was that her hands had stopped shaking for the first time in 2 days, and she hadn't even noticed until right now. She typed, It's worse than you know. His reply, Tell me. So she did. Standing at her stove with the pot cooling and the kids still arguing, she typed it all out. Patty, the landlord. Harold Pike on her porch with his card and his measured threats. The child services visit. The bank call. The 3 weeks. She sent it the way she had told Dana, flat and factual. No decoration, because the facts were already bad enough. She waited. Boone's reply came in 4 sentences. Don't sign anything. Don't talk to Pike again. Don't move 1 box. We'll be there Thursday. Naomi looked at Thursday on the calendar on her wall. 2 days. She typed. How many of you? The pause before his answer was longer than the others. Enough. She put the phone down. She called the kids to dinner. She didn't sleep that night, but it was a different kind of not sleeping. Not the grinding arithmetic of panic that had been running in her head for weeks. Something more like waiting. Alert and still. The way air feels before a storm, when the pressure shifts and everything goes quiet and even the birds stop. Something was coming. She just didn't know yet what something looked like at this scale. Wednesday passed the way bad days do when you're watching the clock, slowly and full of small humiliations that each felt disproportionate against the weight of everything else. The grocery store, the weight of eyes in the produce aisle, the school, where the secretary was 20 seconds slower than usual to acknowledge her. And those 20 seconds told a complete story. She drove past Patty's place and saw it open and full, which meant the world had decided Patty's choice was correct, which meant the world had decided hers was wrong. She went home. She applied for 2 jobs online, a cleaning company in Harrington and a grocery store in Millfield 40 minutes away. Both felt like dropping paper into a well, necessary, but with no guarantee anything would ever come back. She called her landlord. Ray Gunderson picked up on the 4th ring with the careful voice of a man who knows exactly which call he's receiving. Ray, she said, keeping her voice even, I want to ask directly, did Harold Pike come to you? Or did you go to him? A long pause. He's been after that land for 2 years. Naomi, you know that. I know. I'm asking which direction the conversation went. A longer pause. He called me. Ray said quietly. The morning after the storm. Said there'd been some activity at the property. Said his attorney was looking at liability questions. Said the timing might be right to revisit the offer. And you said yes. Naomi, I'm 71 years old. My wife has medical bills. The offer is fair. How long did it take you to say yes, Ray? The silence on his end was its own answer. You've been a good tenant, he said. I want you to know that. I know, she said. Goodbye, Ray. She sat in her car in her own driveway and stared at the farmhouse, at the roof that strangers had fixed in the middle of the night, at the firewood stacked neatly against the barn wall, at the window where Rosie's crayon drawings were taped to the glass because they'd run out of refrigerator space. She thought about what it would mean to pack everything in 3 weeks, where she would go, how she would explain it to Eli, who had already lost so much stability in his 8 years, that another upheaval would register in his body the way cold does, settling into the joints, taking a long time to leave. How she would tell Rosie that the farmhouse with the big yard was no longer theirs. She thought about this for exactly as long as she could stand it. Then she went inside and helped Rosie with her letters, and checked Eli's math, and read them both a chapter of their book, and turned out their lights. She went back to the kitchen and stood in front of the stack of envelopes. Not yet, she said out loud to no one. To the stack, to Harold Pike and Ray Gunderson, and everyone who had decided her powerlessness was an opportunity. Not yet. Thursday morning came in cold and clear. She had gotten the kids to school and returned to the farmhouse and was trying to draft a letter to a legal aid organization. A letter that kept stalling because she didn't know how to describe what was happening without sounding either paranoid or too ordinary. When she heard it, faint at first, then building, then unmistakable. Engines. She stood up so fast her chair scraped. She went to the front window. The road was empty, but the sound kept compounding, coming from the east, from the direction of the highway, growing with the steady accumulating quality of something very large moving very fast. Her heart was in her throat. She pressed her hand against the glass. Then the first one came around the bend. Then the second. Then 20. Then 50. They kept coming. They kept coming and kept coming and kept coming. And Naomi stood at her window with her palm against the glass and her heart making a sound she could feel in her teeth. The road filled, and then the road overflowed, and they were pulling onto the shoulder and into the field beside the road. And the sound had become something total, not just something you heard, but Something you felt in your chest and in your bones, and in the floorboards under your feet. She counted to 100 and stopped counting. Her phone rang. Boone, she answered. Look, out your window, he said. I am, she said. Her voice came out strange, compressed, like someone had squeezed the air from it. 1,500 riders, he said. 17 chapters. 4 states, a pause. You're not alone anymore. Naomi. She pressed her hand harder against the glass. Boone, she said. What are you going to do? What we should have done before we left, he said. Hold on. He hung up. She watched him ride to the front of the line, swing off his bike, and walk toward her door. She opened it before he knocked. He looked different in daylight than he had in the blizzard. Older, maybe, or just more visible. The grey in his hair was silver in the morning sun. He had lines around his eyes that went deep, the kind that come from squinting into years of weather. He looked at her the same way he had from her porch steps the first time. Straight on, no performance. You look like you haven't slept in 4 days, he said. 3, she said. Close enough. He nodded toward the inside of the house. Can we talk? They sat at the same kitchen table, and Naomi told him everything she hadn't put in the text. The details, the tone of Harold Pike's voice, the specific way he had smiled while explaining how little power she had. Boone listened without interrupting, hands flat on the table, face completely still. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Harold Pike, he said. Town council, development company. He's got the landlord. He's got your employer. He's got child services on call. He said it like he was reading a map. What else? The bank called about the sale. 3 weeks to closing. He was quiet. I want to ask you something, he said. And I need you to be straight with me. Okay, is there anything about your situation that isn't clean? Anything Pike could actually use if someone looked closely enough? Naomi looked at him. I've been skipping meals to feed my kids, she said. I have $342 in my account. Well, I have a car with a belt that's going any day. I'm 60 days behind on 1 credit card. She paused. That's everything that's real. Boone held her eyes. Okay, he said. That's what I needed to know. He stood up, pulled out his phone, and made 2 calls in rapid succession. Both brief, both in the shorthand of people who have worked together long enough that full sentences aren't required. When he hung up, he looked at her with something that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. We're going to town, he said. What happened in Blackwater that Thursday afternoon would be talked about for years. The way 1,500 motorcycles move through a small Pennsylvania town is something that doesn't translate to language. It has to be heard and felt. The way a thunderstorm has to be experienced to understand why people once believed it was the voice of something bigger than themselves. They came in orderly. 2 lanes, signal lights observed. Every traffic law followed with a precision that was itself a statement. We are not what you think we are, and we will prove it by doing everything exactly right. People came out of their houses. People came out of their shops. Children pressed faces to school bus windows. The police chief of Blackwater, Earl Pute, 19 years on the job, and under the impression he had seen most of what this town had to offer, stood on the steps of the municipal building and watched motorcycles fill Main Street and said out loud to no one in particular, Lord have mercy, his deputy said. Should we call the state police? Pute watched Boone Walker swing off the lead bike, look up at him, and raise one hand in greeting, unhurried, respectful, the gesture of someone who has an appointment. No, Pute said. I think we better hear what they have to say. To news vans had appeared from somewhere. A local reporter Naomi vaguely recognized was already moving through the crowd with a microphone. Someone was live streaming on a phone. Within 20 minutes, the intersection of Main and Route 9 in Blackwater, Pennsylvania had more cameras pointed at it than it had seen in its entire documented history. Boone walked to the steps of the municipal building. He didn't have a microphone. He didn't need one. His voice carried the way voices do when they're used to competing with engine noise and wind. My name is Boone Walker, he said. I'm a veteran. I'm a former paramedic. I'm a road captain for one of the oldest veterans charitable organizations in this country. And 5 days ago, a 35-year-old single mother named Naomi Reyes opened her door to 98 of my riders in a blizzard and probably saved 3 lives. He paused. The crowd, which had grown to fill the sidewalk and spill into the street, was completely silent. In the 4 days since we left her driveway, Boone continued, Naomi Reyes has lost her job, received an eviction notice, had a report filed against her with child services, and been visited by a town council member who offered to pay her to disappear. Murmuring moved through the crowd. His name is Harold Pike, Boone said, and I have documentation. The murmuring grew louder. Harold Pike was somewhere in that crowd. Naomi didn't see him yet, but she saw the moment people started looking for him. That collective ripple of a group trying to locate someone. Boone reached into his jacket and produced a folder. Financial records showing Pike's development company made an offer on this land 2 years ago. Call logs between Pike's office and First County Bank. A timeline that puts his call to Ray Gunderson 6:47 in the morning, less than 18 hours after we left Naomi's driveway. How did you get bank records? Naomi said quietly to Doc, who was standing beside her. You don't want to know, Doc said without looking at her. I absolutely do. We have a guy. Former finance. Very motivated. Boone was still talking. This woman didn't do anything wrong. She did something right. And the town she's lived in for 4 years came after her for it. He lowered the folder. We're not here for trouble. We're here because trouble found her first. The crowd had gone completely still again. And then, from somewhere near the back, a woman's voice. I believe him. Another. From a different direction. I know Naomi. She's a good mother. And then, because crowds have a tipping point, a moment where the direction clarifies and everyone who's been uncertain feels which way to fall, more voices. Not a roar, not a chant, just a layering of sound, agreement finding its volume. Chief Pute descended the steps. He walked to Boone and extended his hand. I'd like to see that documentation, he said. Boone handed it to him. Harold Pike made one mistake. He'd been in the crowd the whole time, maintaining the composure of a man still calculating his odds, who had not yet concluded he was losing. But when the chief took the folder, when the camera swung in his direction in response to someone pointing, when the news reporter started moving toward him with the microphone, he turned and walked quickly toward the parking lot. In a smaller crowd. It might have looked like ordinary movement, among 1,500 people who had ridden across for states and were watching everything. It looked exactly like what it was. Naomi watched him go and felt something settle in her chest. Not triumph, not satisfaction, something quieter. The feeling of a weight shifting, not gone yet, but no longer entirely hers to carry alone. Doc's hand appeared briefly on her shoulder and disappeared. It's not over, he said, but it's different now. What happens next? She said. Right now, about 60 of our guys are in your landlord's driveway having a very calm, very polite conversation with Ray Gunderson. Naomi turned to look at him. Boone sent them before we even got here. He sent them before we left Pennsylvania. Doc paused. He's been planning this since you sent that contact form. She stared at him. He read it. He's been monitoring the chapter email since before we left your driveway. Doc paused again. He wasn't going to leave you hanging. He just didn't tell you, because he didn't want to offer you something to hope for that might not come together. Naomi turned back to the crowd, to the cameras, to the chief reading through the folder, with the focused attention of a man who has just understood his quiet little town is about to become significantly less quiet. He was already planning. This before I sent anything, she said. Yeah, Doc said. She absorbed that. Why? She said. Doc was quiet for a moment. Because Boone has a daughter. She's 32, raising 2 kids alone in West Virginia. He stopped. He doesn't talk about it. But I've ridden with this man for 20 years. I know what his face looks like when something means something to him. Naomi pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry on Main Street in Blackwater, Pennsylvania, in front of 1,500 bikers and to news cameras. She was absolutely not. "Okay," she said, voice perfectly steady. "What do we do right now?" "Right now," Doc said, "you let us handle what's happening out here and the inside." He looked at her. "You go get your kids from school." She blinked. "What? Go get them," he said simply. "Bring them here. Let them see this. Let them see that what you did mattered enough for this many people to show up." He paused. "Let Eli see it." Naomi thought about her 8-year-old son who had learned too early to be careful with hope. She turned and walked to her car. She drove to the school. She signed them out at the front desk with hands that were entirely steady, walked down the hallway to Eli's classroom, and appeared in the doorway. He looked up from his desk. The first thing he did was scan her face for what was wrong. That instant reflexive assessment, the way children learn to read their parents' expressions, the way other people read weather. He didn't find what he was looking for. Her face wasn't carrying bad news. "Come on," she said. "I need to show you something." He grabbed his backpack without questions. They picked up Rosie from down the hall, and Naomi drove them back toward town. When they came around the last bend before Main Street and the sound hit them, that wall of engines and voices and something enormous in motion, Eli sat very straight in his seat. "Mom," he said. "I know," she said. "Is that all for us?" "Yes." Rosie was already pressed against the window, eyes enormous, mouth open. "There's so many," she whispered. "Yeah, baby," Naomi said. "There really are." She parked and they got out, and she took both her children's hands, one on each side, and they walked toward the crowd. Big Ray saw them first. He was near the edge of the street, and when he spotted Naomi with the kids, he made a sound somewhere between a whistle and a signal, and it rippled outward, and within 30 seconds a path had opened through the crowd. Not performed, not theatrical, just people stepping back to make space. Naomi walked her children through it. When they reached the center where Boone was, standing with Chief Pute and the news reporter, and the folder that was going to keep Harold Pike occupied for a very long time, Boone turned. He looked at Eli. Eli looked at him. "You're the one who split the log," Boone said. Eli straightened. "Yes, sir, Dutch told me. Said you were a natural." Eli's face did something complicated and moved, like something he had been holding very carefully for a very long time had just been given permission to set itself down. Rosie was already tugging on the sleeve of the nearest biker she recognized, pointing into the crowd, asking questions with the rapid fearlessness of a child who has decided the world is full of people worth knowing. Naomi stood in the middle of the noise and the crowd and the cameras and 1,500 engines cooling, quietly along Main Street, and she held her children's hands and she let herself feel it, all of it, the weight of the past 5 days and the 4 years before them, the skipped meals and the stack of envelopes and the $342 and the leaking ceiling and the car with the failing belt. Every morning she had gotten up and done it anyway, because there were 2 people who needed her too. She let herself feel all of it, and then she let it be smaller than what surrounded her, because what surrounded her was 1,500 people who had ridden across 4 states for a woman they had known for one night. A woman who had opened her door when every reasonable instinct said don't, and discovered that the most dangerous looking people in the room were sometimes the only ones who showed up when it mattered. Boone appeared beside her. "Ray Gunderson wants to talk to you," he said quietly. "He's in his truck around the corner." Our guys gave him some space. "What does he want?" "He's asking if there's a way to undo the sale." Boone paused. Pike apparently made some representations to him that weren't entirely accurate, and Ray is now aware those inaccuracies are on the record. Naomi looked at him. "Boone, what exactly do you have on Harold Pike?" He was quiet for a moment, his expression entirely composed. "Enough," he said. "That's the same answer you gave me about how many riders were coming." "It's a good answer," he said. She held his eyes. "I want to know, Pike's development company," he said carefully, "has been receiving permit approvals through channels that would not survive a form audit. Several of those permits involve property acquisitions where the previous owners were motivated to sell quickly. We have names, dates, and amounts. Our finance guy is thorough. You've known this since when? Yesterday morning. And you waited. You don't go at someone like Pike with half a case, he said. You wait until you have the whole one. She looked at the crowd, at the cameras, at Chief Pute working through the folder, with the focused expression of a man who has just realized he's quiet. Little town is about to become significantly less quiet. It's going to get bigger before it gets smaller, she said. Yes, Boone agreed. My kids are in the middle of it. Your kids are watching their mother get justice. That's different. She thought about Eli's face when Boone had said, "You're a natural." That loosening, that putting down of something heavy. Yeah, she said. Okay. She squeezed her children's hands once. Then she walked around the corner to talk to Ray Gunderson. And behind her along Main Street in Blackwater, Pennsylvania, 1,500 engines waited like held breath, patient, present, going nowhere. Ray Gunderson was a man who had the look of someone who had been sitting with a bad decision long enough to know exactly how bad it was. He was in his truck with the engine off and both hands on the steering wheel, going nowhere. And when Naomi knocked on the passenger window, he flinched like someone who has been caught in the thing he's been doing. She opened the door and got in. They sat in silence for a moment. I didn't know, Ray said finally. About what he'd done to you. The Child Services report. He shook his head. When he called me that morning, he made it sound like a liability issue, like the bikers being on the property had created some legal exposure I needed to deal with. He manufactured the liability, Naomi said. I know that now, he paused. You knew something was wrong when you called me. You said I deserved to hear it directly. That's not what you say when everything is clean. Ray's hands tightened on the wheel. I told myself I was just selling land, he said. That you'd land somewhere. That it wasn't my problem to. He stopped. I'm 71 years old, and I know better than that. Naomi looked at the windshield. Outside she could hear the crowd on Main Street, voices, and the occasional rumble of an engine. The distant sound of a news reporter doing a stand-up. Can you undo the sale? She said. I talked to my attorney an hour ago, Ray said. The contract has a 30-day inspection period before it's final. We're in day 3. I can pull out, he paused. Pike will sue. He's going to have bigger problems than suing you. Naomi said. Ray looked at her for the first time since she'd gotten in. Really looked at her. At 35 years of holding things together visible in the lines around her eyes. At a woman with every reason to be furious with him, sitting in his truck, having a straight conversation. I'm sorry, Naomi, he said. And it wasn't a polished apology. It was the rough, uncomfortable kind that costs something. She nodded once. Pull out of the contract, she said, and lower my rent by $200. Ray blinked. That's fair, she said. And you know it. A long pause. $800 a month, he said. Starting last month, she said. An even longer pause. Starting last month, he said. She got out of the truck. She walked back around the corner to where her children were. Big Ray was teaching Rosie how to shake hands like she meant it. Eli was standing beside Boone, asking him something in a low voice that Boone was answering with the careful attention of a man who takes children's questions seriously. She stopped walking. She just looked at them for a moment. Materialized beside her. Quietly, without announcement, already reading the situation. Gunderson, he said. $800 a month, retroactive, she said. He's pulling out of the sale. Doc made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Tell Boone later, she said. Right now I need to ask you something. Okay, the documentation on Pike, she said. The permits, the other acquisitions, the people who were pressured to sell. How many people? Doc held her gaze. For properties in the last 6 years, we've identified 3 previous owners who had pressure applied before they sold. 2 of them are still in the county. Still here. Naomi said slowly. In this town, yes. She looked back at the crowd on Main Street, at the cameras, at Chief Pute now on his phone with the body language of someone making a call he's been building toward. Those people need to be here today, she said. We thought you'd say that, Doc said. We've already reached out. She turned to look at him. "We've been working this for 48 hours, Naomi," he said. Matter of fact, not proud, just explaining. Boone doesn't go anywhere without the full map. She shook her head slowly. "Who are you people?" she said. Doc almost smiled. "The people who showed up," he said. The next hour moved fast. Chief Pute was on the phone with the county district attorney's office. 2 of the 3 previous property owners Doc had mentioned arrived on Main Street within 45 minutes. A retired teacher named Margaret Clover, 68 years old, small and absolutely furious in the contained way of someone who has been waiting years for a room where her fury would matter, and a veteran named Dennis Shawless, 55, quiet in the way of men who have carried anger so long it has changed shape into something exhausted. He'd driven 30 minutes. He was still in his work clothes. Margaret Clover shook Naomi's hand with both of hers. "He told me my foundation was condemned," she said. Not bothering with hello. Had a man come out and inspect it. Said it would cost $8,000 to fix. Then made an offer the following week. She looked at Naomi steadily. "I never got a second opinion. I couldn't afford one. I've regretted it every single day for 4 years. The foundation wasn't condemned," Naomi said. "The new owners did a full renovation," Margaret said. "I drove past 2 years ago. It has a pool now." Dennis Shawless looked at Naomi, at Doc, at no one in particular. "My father built that farmhouse," he said. "I didn't want to sell. Pike's attorney told me there was an easement issue on the deed that would make it unsellable and possibly leave me liable." He stopped. "My attorney said it would cost $30,000 to fight it. I had $11,000 in savings." He looked at the ground. "I took the offer. The easement issue," Naomi said, "didn't exist," Dennis said flatly. "Found that out 2 years later, when I finally had someone look at the original deed. I just didn't have the money to do anything about it by then." Naomi looked at these 2 people. Margaret with her 4 years of contained fury and Dennis with his $11,000 and his father's farmhouse, and felt something clarify inside her. This had never only been about her. Harold Pike had been moving through Blackwater the way water moves through limestone, patient and methodical, finding the weak places and widening them. He had found her because she was convenient, because she was poor and alone, and the blizzard had handed him a pretext that looked from the outside like community concern. But she was just the latest Doc. She turned to Doc. "I need to talk to the reporter," she said. "She's been asking for you for the last hour." The reporter's name was Claire Morse, young, maybe 26, with the slightly overwhelmed energy of someone whose assignment had expanded by about 500% in the last 90 minutes. She had a cameraman and a notebook and a phone she checked with one eye. While she was looking at Naomi Doss, they stepped slightly apart from the crowd. "I want to talk about Harold Pike," Naomi said. "But not just about me." Claire Moss's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I mean there are 2 other people here today who were pushed off their property by the same man using the same methods," Naomi said. "And I think there are probably more we haven't found yet." Claire Morse looked over Naomi's shoulder at Margaret and Dennis. "Can they talk to me?" "They want to," Naomi said. "That's why they came." Claire Morse clicked her pen. "Ms. Reyes," she said, and her voice had shifted into something more careful and more serious. "I need to tell you something before this goes further. Harold Pike's development company has been an advertiser with our station for 3 years." She held Naomi's gaze. "Which means, when I file this story, I'm going to face pushback from people above my pay grade. I'm going to file it anyway. But I want you to know what you're setting in motion. Once this goes out, it doesn't stop. It gets picked up. It gets bigger. It involves people I can't predict. Are you ready for that?" Naomi thought about the stack of envelopes on her counter. She thought about Eli scanning her face every time she walked through a door. She thought about $400 in a coffee can and a job she no longer had and a man who had stood on her porch and smiled while he described how little power she had. "Yes," she said. Claire Morse waved her. "Cameraman over." Harold Pike was arrested at 4:17 that afternoon, not on Main Street. He had left before that became unavoidable. He was arrested at his office by two county detectives who'd been briefed by the district attorney's office of the chief Pute hand-delivered Boone's documentation. The charges included fraud, coercion, and 3 counts of wire fraud related to the manufactured property defects used against Dennis Shawless and to other landowners whose cases had surfaced by early afternoon. As word spread and people began calling the police department, Naomi heard about the arrest from Doc, who heard it from Boone, who heard it from someone he declined to name, with a slight smile that suggested the someone had access to police scanner traffic. She was sitting on the hood of her car when Doc told her. The crowd on Main Street had thinned. The cameras had relocated to the county courthouse, but there were still hundreds of bikers along the street, and the energy had shifted from confrontational to something else, something that felt almost like a street fair, which was not something Naomi had expected from 1500 Hells Angels, but which she was increasingly learning she should stop being surprised by. Formally charged, she said. Arraignment tomorrow, Doc said. His attorney is already talking about bail, but the Doe is pushing back. 3 victims and documented evidence of a pattern. That's not a quick release situation. Naomi sat with that. She waited for the surge of satisfaction she had expected. It didn't come exactly. What came instead was something quieter, a slow release of something that had been pulled tight inside her for 5 days. For 4 years, maybe longer. My kids are going to be okay, she said. Not a question, just a thing she was trying on out loud, testing its weight. Yes, Doc said simply. She nodded. Rosie appeared from somewhere in the crowd, running, holding a Hells Angels patch in her hand. Mom, look, she held it up. Kevin gave it to me. He said, I'm an honorary member. Honorary, Naomi said. He said you have to actually ride a motorcycle to be a real member. But since I'm 6, I can be honorary. Rosie examined the patch with intense satisfaction. I'm going to put it on my backpack. That sounds right, Naomi said. Rosie ran back into the crowd. Eli appeared a moment later, walking rather than running, with the careful dignity of a boy who had decided he was slightly too old to run in public. He stopped beside his mother. The man from the news talked to me, he said. Naomi looked at him. What did he ask? How I felt about everything. About the bikers and about what happened to you. Eli was quiet for a moment. I told him I felt like when you're reading a book and the bad part happens, and you're scared it won't get better, and then it gets better. Naomi looked at her son. He was looking at the crowd, not at her. The way he sometimes looked away from things he had said that cost him something to say. That's a really good answer, she said. I thought so. Then, quieter. Is it actually better? Or does it just look like it right now? She put her arm around his shoulders. It's actually better, she said. The thing that was trying to push us out is being dealt with. The house is ours again. For longer than 30 days, he absorbed this. Because of them. He nodded at the crowd. Because of them and because of some things we did. And because some people who were wrong decided to be less wrong. It's usually more than one thing. Eli nodded slowly, like he was filing this somewhere important. Dutch said, I can come visit the chapter house sometime, he said. If you say it's okay. I'll talk to Dutch, she said. A small, careful smile appeared on his face. He walked back toward the crowd. Naomi watched him go and thought about the boy he had been a week ago. Shoulders up, eyes down. The posture of a child, braced for impact. And the boy he was right now, walking through 1500 strangers with his chin up. She pressed her fingers against her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she got off the hood of her car and went to find Boone. He was at the far end of Main Street, on his phone, with the focused stillness of a man managing several things at once. When he saw her coming, he ended the call and waited. The arrest, she said. Confirmed, he said. The other landowners, Dennis and Margaret. The DA is opening a formal investigation into all of Pike's property acquisitions for the last 10 years. Margaret is meeting with them tomorrow. Dennis has already given a statement. He looked at her. There are going to be more, Naomi. When something like this breaks open, I know, she said. He nodded. She looked down the street, at the bikers, at the remaining cameras, at the main street of Blackwater, Pennsylvania, which looked both exactly like itself and completely different from what it had been this morning. "What do you need right now?" he said. "Practically, today." She thought about it. "My car," she said. "The serpentine belt. It's been about to go for a month. If I don't get a job in the next 2 weeks, I can't afford to fix it. And if it goes while I'm driving, where are your keys?" She looked at him. "What? Your car keys?" Boone said. "There's a mechanic in the group. Form a NASCAR pit crew. Give him the keys and tell him what's wrong. It'll be done in 2 hours. I can't let you. You opened your door in a blizzard," he said. And his voice was not unkind, but it was very firm. "Stop performing independence and let people help you." The words landed with the precision of something true. She reached into her pocket and held out her keys. He took them and walked away. She stood there for a moment. Then she walked back toward the center of town, because there were still things happening and people to talk to. And Naomi Reyes had never in her life stood still when things needed doing. What happened in the days after that Thursday in Blackwater was not a single dramatic moment. It was dozens of smaller ones layered together, the way a quilt is made, each piece its own shape, the pattern only visible when you step back far enough. The bikers didn't leave that night. They'd arranged camping in the field adjacent to Naomi's farmhouse with her permission, which she gave without hesitation, because she had already had 98 strangers in her living room, and apparently her threshold for unexpected guests had been permanently recalibrated. They set up with the efficiency of people who have slept outdoors often enough that it doesn't require much thought. By evening, there were campfires going and food being shared, and the sound of men telling stories in the particular way that men who have been through things tell stories. Sideways, with humor, with gaps where the hard parts used to be. Eli sat at the edge of one of the fires with Dutch and 3 other riders, listening with the total absorption of a boy who was learning something important about the world. Rosie had fallen asleep in the living room by the man's jacket, which he had offered without ceremony, and watched her curl upon without any expression except quiet satisfaction. And Naomi was in her kitchen with Boone and Doc and a woman named Sylvie, the chapter's treasurer from the Pittsburgh chapter, who turned out to have an MBA and the brisk, efficient manner of someone who considers financial disorganization a personal affront. They were going through Naomi's actual numbers, all of them, the full picture she had been carrying alone. Sylvie had a yellow legal pad, and the pen she clicked with the focused energy of someone who runs toward problems rather than away from them. "Okay," she said, clicking the pen. "Rent is now $800, which means your monthly fixed costs dropped by $200. Real money. The credit card, that's 60 days late. What's the balance?" $1,200. Naomi said. Click. Manageable. "The car's done. Belts replaced. They also found a brake pad issue and fixed it. Don't argue about it." Click. Employment. "You said you applied to 2 places, Harrington Cleaning Company and the Millfield Grocery Store." Sylvie made a sound. Not a good sound. 40 minutes each way to Millfield is going to eat your gas budget. Harrington is better, but cleaning company wages in this county are approximately terrible. She looked at Naomi over the legal pad. "What do you actually want to do? Not what's available. What do you want?" Naomi blinked. It was such a direct question. People didn't ask it. Not to her. Not in this specific way. "What do you want?" As though what she wanted was a relevant factor. She had spent 4 years operating on the assumption that it wasn't. "I want to cook," she said, and the honesty of it surprised even her. The way things do when you haven't said them out loud before. "I'm good at it. What I put together that night for 98 people out of almost nothing." She stopped. "You fed nearly 100 people on next to nothing and nobody complained," Boone said from across the table. "I didn't complain. I'm notoriously hard to please about food." "You're notoriously hard to please about everything," Doc said. "The diner on Route 9, Sylvie said, not looking up. "Patty's place. She fired me," Naomi said. "Right. Which means there's an established customer base on that road who no longer have a reason to be loyal to Patty specifically." Sylvie clicked her pen. What would it cost to open something small? Not a full restaurant. Counter service. Soul food. Comfort food. The kind that doesn't require a massive kitchen build-out. Naomi stared at her. I don't have capital, she said. We know, Sylvie said simply. That's why I'm asking what it would cost. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a question that is also an offer. Naomi had enough experience with people offering things that came with conditions to know the difference between that and something clean. She looked at Boone. He was looking at the table. The chapter has a veterans community fund, he said. We've used it to fund 3 small businesses in the last 5 years. All veteran-owned. All successful. He paused. The committee would have to vote. But I'm the road captain, and I have standing to bring a recommendation. He finally looked up. Would you let us bring a recommendation? Naomi thought about every time she had said no to help, because yes meant acknowledging need, and about the conversation with herself on the hood of her car, about Eli scanning her face, about $342, about 4 years of performing strength in an empty house. She thought about what Boone had said on Main Street. Stop performing independence and let people help you. Yes, she said. Sylvie was already writing. The next morning, something happened that no one had planned. It started with church. The rider who had sat with Rosie checking her breathing. He'd spent the night making quiet phone calls away from the main camp. In the morning, he appeared at Naomi's door with 3 other riders and a list. There are 11 families in this county whose heating bills are more than 90 days overdue, he said. We've got the list from a contact at the utility company. He held it out. We'd like to go pay them. Naomi took the list. She looked at the names. She recognized 4 of them. Some of these people weren't kind to me this week, she said quietly. I know, Church said. You want us to skip them? She looked at the names again. She thought about what it meant to be the kind of person who pays heating bills for people who weren't kind to you. Whether that was strength or foolishness or some complicated combination of both that didn't have a clean name. No, she said. Don't skip anyone. Church nodded. One more thing, he said. Spider-Man, Kevin, wants to know if you'd like a vegetable garden put in before we leave. He used to work landscaping. Says the soil on the south side of your house is good. Naomi looked at him. A vegetable garden. In the spring, you'd have tomatoes, peppers, beans, maybe squash. He paused. Rosie expressed interest in growing things. Naomi thought about Rosie expressing interest. Rosie expressed interest in approximately everything, loudly and immediately. She had apparently found time between her crayon motorcycles and her honorary membership, and falling asleep on Spider-Man's jacket too. Advocate for a garden. Tell Kevin yes, she said. The thing that broke the remaining ice in Blackwater happened at -1:15 that morning, and it had nothing to do with cameras or documentation or anything that could have been planned. It happened because of a woman named Dot Pearson, who was 77 years old and had lived 4 houses down from the Route 9 intersection for 40 years, and whose furnace had gone out the previous December, and who had spent 6 weeks existing on space heaters and extra sweaters because the repair cost was more than she had. The bikers found out the way they seemed to find out about everything, through a network of quiet conversations that Naomi was beginning to understand was simply what happened when you put 1,500 people in a small town, and they started talking to residents. By noon, a team of 4 riders with HVAC experience, one of them, a quiet man named Garrett, an actual licensed technician, had Dot Pearson's furnace running. Came out onto her porch while they were finishing up, a small woman in a house coat, and she stood there and watched them pack their tools, and then she did something nobody had arranged or expected. She started to cry, not quietly, the way very old people sometimes cry when something touches the place where their whole life has made them tender, full and uncomplicated, and without any apparent concern for who was watching. The biker nearest to her, a man named Cole, 6'2" with a scar across his chin, froze for a moment. Then he walked up to her porch steps. "Ma'am," he said. "I'm sorry," Dot said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I don't mean to." It's just that nobody, she stopped. Tried again. Nobody came all winter. I asked my neighbor twice, and she said she was busy and I didn't want to be a bother. So she stopped again. Cole stood there. Then he took off his leather jacket, the one with the patches, the one that had been riding with him for 15 years, and he put it gently around her shoulders. You're not a bother, he said. You never were. Someone in the small crowd that had gathered took a photo. Within 4 hours, it was on every major news platform in the country. Pearson, 77, the jacket, the furnace, the porch, the caption someone wrote. They came for one woman. They stayed for everyone. By midnight, it had been viewed 6 million times. By morning, 11 million. Naomi found out when her phone, fully charged for once, started ringing with numbers she didn't recognize. Dana called from Ohio in a voice entirely unlike her usual one. Naomi, Dana said, you need to turn on your computer. What? The photo. You need to. Nay. Dana's voice cracked. It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. Naomi opened her laptop with the creeping uncertain feeling of someone who has been the center of a story long enough to know the story has developed a life beyond her. She found the photo. She read the caption. She looked at the number of views. She sat in her kitchen in the 6:30 morning quiet while her children slept and the campfires in the field had burned to coals, and the world outside had apparently decided overnight that a story about a woman in Blackwater, Pennsylvania, and the people who showed up for her was worth 11 million of its attention. She closed the laptop. Her phone rang again. A known number. She answered. Ms. Reyes, a woman's voice, brisk and warm simultaneously. My name is Andrea Walsh. I'm a producer at Good Morning America. We'd like to talk to you about coming on the show. Naomi looked at the closed laptop. She thought about her coffee can with the $400. She thought about Sylvie's yellow legal pad and the question, what do you actually want? She thought about the name that had been forming quietly in the back of her mind since the night in the blizzard when a 6-year-old had fallen asleep in a leather jacket and everything had been impossibly okay. I might be interested, Naomi said carefully, but I'd need to bring some people with me, and I need to tell my own story, she said, not have it told for me. A brief pause. That's exactly what we want, Andrea Walsh said. Naomi looked through the window at the campfires in the field, at the hundreds of motorcycles parked in the dark, at the farmhouse that was hers again for longer than 30 days, for $800 a month, with a south-facing wall where tomatoes would grow in spring. Let me call you back, she said. She hung up. She put on her coat and walked out to the field. Boone was already awake. He was almost always already awake. He was sitting on a log with a cup of coffee that had to be cold, looking at the tree line, the way people look at things when they're thinking about something else entirely. She sat down beside him. Tell me about Rose's hearth, she said. He turned to look at her. It was Sylvie's phrase, he said. She said it at the meeting 2 days ago. We'd been talking about what you might want to build, and Sylvie said, he paused. She said some fires keep a whole house warm, and she called it Rose's hearth. Naomi looked at the tree line. Rose's hearth. A warm place where nobody hungry was turned away, where the coffee was hot and the food was real, and the door opened for everyone, including the people the world had decided weren't worth the trouble. There's a building on Route 9, Naomi said. 3 doors down from Patty's. Been empty 2 years. The owner is a woman named Frances Holt. I've seen her at the grocery store twice, and she always looks tired. Okay, Boone said. I want to call her today, Naomi said. Before Morning America, and the story and all of it. I want to have a real conversation with a real person about a real building. She looked at him. Is that strange? That's exactly right, he said. They sat there another moment in the cold morning quiet, coals glowing in the field, the town of Blackwater slowly waking around them, changed in ways not yet fully visible, the way ice changes under a thaw before the surface shows it. Then Naomi stood up. I'm going to make breakfast, she said. For everyone, Naomi, Boone said. There are 400 people out here. I know, she said. I'm going to need help. She walked back to the farmhouse. Behind her, she heard Boone get up, heard him start talking to the people nearest him, heard the particular sound of people organizing around a purpose, quick, direct, a live dot. She went into her kitchen and started the coffee. She had a phone call to make about a building on Route 9 and a show to call back in New York, and a story that was bigger than her now and moving on its own, and children who were going to wake up in an hour and need breakfast. She put on the largest pot she owned. She got to work. Frances Holt picked up on the second ring. She sounded exactly the way she looked at the grocery store, tired and careful, the voice of someone who had stopped expecting good news from calls she didn't recognize. Miss Holt, Naomi said. My name is Naomi Reyes. I don't know if you know who I am. I know who you are, Frances said, and her voice had shifted, not into warmth exactly, but into something more awake. Half the county knows who you are this morning. I want to talk to you about the building on Route 9, Naomi said. The one that's been empty. I want to know if you'd be willing to lease it. A pause. For what? A diner, Naomi said. Small, counter service. The kind of place where nobody goes hungry if they can't pay. A longer pause. I've been trying to lease that building for 2 years, Frances said slowly. Nobody wants a space that's small on a road that's slow. I want it, Naomi said. You have capital. I have people behind me, Naomi said, and a very determined treasurer named Sylvie, who is probably more frightening than anyone you've negotiated with before. Frances Holt was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed. A short, surprised sound. The laugh of someone who hadn't expected to do it. Come see it this afternoon, Frances said. I'll be there. Naomi hung up. She looked at the 400 people eating breakfast in and around her farmhouse. The organized chaos of it. The sound, the smell of coffee and food moving through the cold morning air. And felt something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Forward motion. Not surviving. Not managing. Not calculating which thing to sacrifice to protect which other thing. Actually moving forward. Eli appeared beside her with a plate of eggs and a look of serious purpose. Dutch says I can call him, he said. He gave me his number. Is that okay? That's okay, Naomi said. He said he's going to teach me to change my own oil when I'm old enough. That's a useful skill. He said it's more useful than most things they teach in school. Eli considered this. I think he's probably right. Eat your own breakfast, Naomi said. I ate, he said, with the slight indignation of someone whose efficiency is being questioned. 20 minutes ago. I've been helping Big Ray with the dishes. She looked at her son. This boy who had somewhere in the last 5 days stood up straighter. Eli, she said. Yeah, I'm proud of you. I know I say it, but I want to make sure you actually hear it. He looked at her. For a moment his face was entirely unguarded. The 8-year-old underneath the careful older brother, completely visible. I hear it, he said quietly. He went back inside. Naomi ate her eggs standing in the cold morning air and watched the field full of motorcycles and campfire coals and men drinking coffee. And she thought, this is what chosen family looks like, not the family you're born into, which arrives without your consent and shapes you in ways you spend years sorting through. The family that shows up in a blizzard. The family that fixes your roof at 3 in the morning. The family that rides for states because the math of someone's suffering doesn't add up, and they cannot unknow it. She had spent 4 years believing she was alone. She had been completely wrong about that. The building on Route 9 was smaller than she'd hoped and more possible than she'd expected. Frances Holt met her there at 12:30 with a key and a quiet directness that Naomi respected immediately. She was 60, angular, with the no-nonsense manner of a woman who had owned commercial property for 30 years and had long since stopped having patience for anything that wasn't honest. She unlocked the door and stepped back. Naomi walked in. Sylvie was behind her. Doc had come too, for reasons he didn't explain, and which Naomi suspected had to do with Boone wanting a second set of eyes. The space was empty and cold and smelled like old wood and possibility. Naomi walked its length. 12 tables, maybe 15 with counter seating along the far wall. A kitchen in the back that needed work, but had the bones, the hood, the gas lines, a walk-in that just needed the compressor replaced. She stood in the center of it. She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. She opened them. "What's the lease?" she said. Francis named a number. It was fair, not cheap, but fair. The kind of number that assumed the person paying it was going to succeed and ought to. Sylvie clicked her pen. 6-month trial period, she said. Not to Francis, but to Naomi, laying out the framework she had clearly already calculated. Month 2 month after that, until the business is established. Then annual. We'll cover the build out through the fund. I've already run the preliminary numbers. Kitchen equipment, the compressor, the seating. We're looking at about 18,000 to open functional. Francis looked at Sylvie, then at Naomi. You really do have a treasurer. She's more frightening than she looks. Naomi confirmed. I look pretty frightening, Sylvie said without looking up from the legal pad. Francis almost smiled. When do you want to open? Naomi thought about it. About what needed doing, what she had, what the fund could move and in what timeline. About the stack of envelopes that was no longer on her counter because she had dealt with each one in the last 4 days. Not all solved, but all faced, all handled, all no longer just sitting there generating dread. 8 weeks, she said. Sylvie clicked her pen. Doable. 8 weeks, Francis said. Okay. She held out her hand. Naomi shook it. And in the empty building on Route 9 that smelled like old wood and the future, Naomi Reyes signed the lease for what would become Rose's hearth. She flew to New York 4 days later. She had never been on a national morning show. She had never been on television at all. She had prepared for this the way she prepared for everything, by thinking through the worst-case version until it was smaller than she could be, and then walking toward it. Andrea Walsh met her in the green room with the practiced warmth of someone who was genuinely kind and also professionally efficient, and those two things coexisted in her without contradiction. How are you feeling? Andrea asked. Honest answer. Naomi said. Please. Like I'm about to do something I don't fully understand yet, but I know why I'm doing it. Why are you doing it? Naomi looked at the monitor, showing the live studio, the lights, the cameras, the audience, because if someone had told me a year ago that the most dangerous looking people in any room were going to be the only ones who showed up for my kids, she said, I wouldn't have believed it. And I think a lot of people are walking around with the same wrong idea I had. Some of them are in situations like mine, and they've closed their door. She paused. I want to talk to those people. Andrea Walsh was quiet for a moment. That's exactly the interview, she said. They went out. The interview was 11 minutes long. Naomi told a story the way she had lived it, directly, without performance, with the specific detail that makes things true. She talked about $342. She talked about the army blankets by the fireplace and the chair she had burned to keep her children warm. She talked about opening the door. She talked about what Boone had said from the porch steps. I think you deserve straight right now. And she said it was the most dignity anyone had shown her in a year. And it had come from a man covered in Hell's Angels patches in the middle of a blizzard. She talked about Eli splitting firewood, about Rosie and the Charlotte tattoo, about 3 in the morning and men fixing her roof, and 3 cups of instant coffee handed up in the dark. And then she talked about Harold Pike and Blackwater, and the people who had been pushed off their land before her, and what it meant that a corruption investigation was now open on a man who had operated for 6 years on the assumption that powerless people stayed that way. The studio was very quiet while she talked. When she finished, Andrea Walsh said, What do you want people to know? One thing. If you could only say one. Naomi thought about it. Don't decide who someone is before you know who they are, she said. The people I was most afraid of were the only ones who came back. The applause started before she was done speaking. She didn't know the clip would be viewed 40 million times in the next 72 hours. She didn't know that Dot Pearson, watching at home in Blackwater, would call her daughter in Pittsburgh afterward and say that girl has iron in her spine and grace in her heart, and I am going to eat at her diner every single week. She didn't know that Dennis Shawless, watching in his apartment, would sit forward in his chair when she said, pushed off their land and feel, for the first time in 6 years, that the weight of what had happened to him had been publicly acknowledged and named. She just got off the set and called her sister. Dana picked up immediately. You were perfect, she said. Her voice was thick. I was myself, Naomi said. That's what I said. The 8 weeks moved the way weeks move when you're building something, faster and slower simultaneously. Days that disappeared in work and moments that expanded into permanence. The kitchen build-out happened in 10 days because 15 bikers descended on Route 9 with tools and expertise, and the focused efficiency of people who had decided this project was happening on their timeline. Garrett, the licensed HVAC technician, handled the compressor. 2 other riders who had worked commercial kitchen installation handled the hood and ventilation. Big Ray personally oversaw the counter seating because he informed Naomi with complete seriousness that he had opinions about counter height. She let him have his opinions. The counter was perfect. Sylvie ran the finances with the precision of a military operation, sending weekly updates so organized and clear that Naomi started looking forward to them in a way she had never in her life looked forward to financial documents. The community fund came through at $17,000, $1,000 under Sylvie's estimate, because Sylvie's estimates were designed to come in under. The name went up on the sign 3 weeks before opening. Rosie's half. Naomi stood on Route 9 and looked at it for a long time. Then Rosie stood beside her, because Rosie went everywhere Naomi went and had developed a fierce proprietary interest in the building. She seemed to understand it bore her name and regularly interrogated the construction workers about their progress with a directness that made grown men answer her seriously. It says Rosie. Rosie said. It does. Rosie considered this. That's me. That's you. I think it should also say an Eli. Rosie said thoughtfully. The hearth part is Eli. A hearth, Naomi said, is the center of a house, the thing that keeps everyone warm. Rosie thought about this carefully. Okay, she said finally. He can be the hearth. Naomi hired for people before opening day. Marcus, the teenager from Patty's Place, who had been the only person in that building who treated her with kindness on her last day, who had texted 3 days after she was fired to say that wasn't right. A small thing, a true thing, the kind that stays. A woman named Grace, out of work since the factory in Harrington closed, who could cook, who showed up to the interview 20 minutes early with a handwritten list of references. A retired veteran named Phil, who wanted part-time, front-of-house work, and whose steadiness Naomi recognized immediately as something a room needed. And Eli, on weekends, for a wage appropriate to an 8-year-old's contribution, which was primarily bussing tables and making people feel welcome through the force of his serious, genuine interest in every person who walked in. He took the job with the gravity of someone beginning an important career. Rosie appointed herself an official greeter, a role no one had offered her, and which she had accepted entirely on her own authority. Opening day was a Tuesday in April, the parking lot filled before 7 in the morning. Not with customers. The doors didn't open until 8. The parking lot filled with motorcycles. 17 chapters. Same as the day on Main Street. Here quietly for the opening. The same way they'd been there for everything else. Not announced. Not performed. Just present. Boone was leaning against his bike when Naomi came out at 7:15. She stopped. She looked at the parking lot. She looked at him. You didn't have to come back, she said. We wanted to see it open, he said simply. You've been back 3 times in 8 weeks. We're invested, he said. She shook her head. Boone and Naomi. They looked at each other for a moment. The particular look of 2 people who have been through something together that neither of them would have predicted, and which had permanently changed the internal map of how they understood the world. "Thank you," she said, and she meant all of it. Every piece. The blizzard and the 3 in the morning and Main Street and the lease and all of it. And he knew she meant all of it. "Open your diner," he said. She went back inside. At 8 o'clock, she unlocked the front door. The first person through it was Dot Pearson, wearing her good coat, having brought a friend, who sat down at the counter and said, "I want whatever's best today, and I want a lot of it." Naomi smiled. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret Clover came in at 8:30 with Dennis Shawless, which surprised Naomi. She hadn't known they knew each other. They took the corner booth and talked for 2 hours. The kind of conversation two people have when they've been carrying a shared weight separately for too long. Chief Pute came in at 9. He ordered the biscuits and gravy, left a 30% tip, and said on his way out, "This was the right thing." Naomi. She understood he meant more than breakfast. The diner stayed full all day, not because of television or the internet or 40 million views, though all of that had brought people from neighboring towns and one couple who had driven 3 hours from Pittsburgh specifically to eat here. It stayed full because the food was real and the welcome was real. And Rosie stood at the door and greeted every single person who walked in with her hand extended, and her 6-year-old authority completely intact. By 2 in the afternoon, Naomi had run through her first full prep and was well into her second. Marcus was holding the kitchen with the focused energy of someone who had found his place. Grace moved through the dining room with the ease of someone who had been doing this 4 years, rather than one day. Naomi stood at the pass-through and watched it, watched her diner, her name on the sign, her children in her building, her people filling the room, and she let herself have it fully, without qualification, without the reflex to minimize or deflect or prepare for the part where it falls apart. She let herself have it. Then the bell above the door rang. She was cleaning the counter when she heard it. The hesitation in the footstep, the particular quality of someone who has pushed through a door they weren't sure they had the right to push through. She looked up. A young woman, mid-20s, a coat too thin for the weather, a child on her hip, a little boy, maybe 18 months, face pressed into her neck, fingers gripping her collar with the total trust of a child who has decided this one person is the whole world. The woman looked around the diner with the careful eyes of someone reading a room to see whether she belonged in it. Naomi had seen that look before. She saw it every morning in her own mirror. 4 years running, the woman spotted the counter and moved toward it. When she sat down, she settled the baby on the stool beside her and kept one hand on his back to steady him. She looked at the menu board. Phil had written in chalk the daily specials, the prices, the nobody goes hungry that Naomi had insisted be at the bottom in letters big enough to read from the door. She looked at the prices, then at that last line, then at Naomi behind the counter. "Do you have anything cheap?" she said quietly. "Or maybe something for a kid. He doesn't eat much." Naomi looked at her. She saw the thin coat and the careful eyes and the way the woman's hand stayed on the baby's back. That automatic, constant contact of a parent who has learned that small people need to feel where you are. She saw herself 1 year ago. The frozen peas and the cracked windows and $342 and the choice between her children eating and herself eating. And the choice she made every single time. And the way she had told herself it was fine, because she was good at fine. She put down the cloth she was holding. She came around the counter. She pulled out the stool on the woman's other side and sat down, so they were at the same level. Not behind the counter, not serving, just two women, side by side. "What's his name?" Naomi said, nodding at the baby. The woman blinked like she hadn't expected a question to come before an answer. "James," she said. "Jamie." "Hi, Jamie," Naomi said. Jamie looked at her from the safety of his mother's neck with enormous, cautious eyes. "How old?" Naomi said. 16 months. "He just started walking last week. They're terrifying once they're walking," Naomi said. "My daughter didn't walk, she ran. First step, and then full speed." Something loosened very slightly in the woman's face. "I'm Naomi." Naomi said. I know, the woman said. I saw you on TV. She paused. I drove 40 minutes to get here. I didn't have enough. I mean, where? She stopped. Started again. I saw what it said at the bottom of the menu, and she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Naomi looked at this young woman with her 16-month-old, and her thin coat and her 40-minute drive, and the particular courage it takes to walk through a door when you're not sure you belong, and felt something move through her chest that was both old and new at once. What does Jamie like? Naomi said. Eggs, the woman said. And bread. Pretty much anything soft. Naomi stood up. She went back behind the counter. She looked at the woman one more time. Honey, she said. And her voice was quiet and entirely certain. Sit down. Around here, nobody eats alone. She went to the kitchen. Marcus was at the grill. Table 4 too, she said. The baby gets scrambled eggs and toast cut small. Mama gets the full breakfast plate. Put it on the house tab. Marcus nodded without a single question, because he was 20 years old and already understood which moments required efficiency over explanation. Naomi went back out. She refilled Pearson's coffee. She checked on Margaret and Dennis in the corner booth. She helped Rosie explain to a confused customer that yes, she was 6, and yes, she was working, and the distinction between honorary membership and employment was actually quite interesting. He wanted to hear about it. She moved through her diner on a Tuesday in April in Blackwater, Pennsylvania, while motorcycles filled the parking lot, and the smell of coffee and real food moved through the room, and the bell above the door rang every few minutes with someone new coming in. And she held all of it. Held it the way you hold something you've earned rather than something you've been given, with both hands and your whole attention, in the specific gratitude of someone who knows exactly what it cost. Later, much later, after the last customer had gone and Marcus and Grace had cleaned the kitchen, and Phil had stacked the chairs, and Rosie had fallen asleep in the back booth, and Eli had very seriously tallied his tips, Boone came inside. He was the last one. The parking lot nearly empty now, just a few bikes remaining, their riders somewhere down the road. He sat at the counter. Naomi poured him a cup of coffee. How was day 1? He said. She thought about the full dining room, about Pearson's good coat, about Margaret and Dennis talking in the corner for 2 hours, about Jamie's 16-month-old fingers gripping his mother's collar, and the way it had felt to say nobody eats alone and mean it, with every part of herself. It was the best day I've had in years, she said. He wrapped his hands around the mug. Boone, she said. Yeah, the night you pulled up to my door, she said, in the blizzard, before you knocked. What were you expecting? He looked at the coffee. Honestly, he said, I was expecting the door to stay closed. Every other house on that road had gone dark. I'd knocked on to before yours. Nobody answered. He looked up. When your door opened, I didn't know what to do for about half a second. You seemed like you knew exactly what to do, she said. I've had a lot of practice looking like that, he said. She looked at him. This grey-haired man who had ridden through a blizzard and made phone calls she'd never know the full content of, and assembled 1,500 people for a woman he'd known less than 24 hours, because the math of her situation didn't sit right with him, and he was the kind of man who acted on things that didn't sit right. Why me? She said. There are people everywhere with situations like mine. Why did you? Because you opened the door, he said simply. Everyone else kept theirs closed. You opened yours, he paused. And then you made soup out of nothing for 100 strangers, and put your grandmother's blanket on a man you'd never met, and brought coffee out at 3 in the morning to people fixing your roof. He looked at her steadily. You kept opening the door, Naomi. Every time it would have been easier to close it, you opened it, he paused. People like that deserve people who show up. The diner was very quiet, outside. A motorcycle started up in the parking lot. Naomi pressed her hands flat on the counter. Same time next year, she said. Every table's on me. Something moved through Boone's face that wasn't quite a smile, but was everything a smile means. We'll hold you to that, he said. He finished his coffee. He put on his jacket. He walked to the door. Boone, she said. He stopped. The family I never knew I needed, she said. That's you. All of you. He stood there for a moment with his hand on the door. Yeah, he said. You're ours, too. He walked out. The bell above the door rang once, clean and clear. Outside. The last motorcycle in the parking lot started up and moved away down Route 9. Its taillight, a red point in the dark, getting smaller and smaller and then going around the bend and disappearing. Naomi stood behind the counter of roses. Hearth on a Tuesday in April in the building on Route 9 that smelled like coffee and biscuits and everything she had built out of $342 and a blizzard and a door she had opened when every reasonable voice said don't. She looked at the dining room, at Rosie asleep in the back booth, at Eli's careful tally of tips on the counter, his handwriting still the deliberate printing of a boy who takes accuracy seriously, at the nobody goes hungry on the chalkboard, at all of it, and Naomi Reyes, who had survived 4 years alone, and a blizzard, and a corrupt man's patience, and a town that had tried to make her small, stood in the middle of everything she had made, not by waiting for the world to be kind, but by being kind first, even when it cost her, even when it frightened her, even at 3 a.m. with instant coffee and nothing to spare, and she understood, completely and finally, that the storm had not broken her, the storm had brought her home.